Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
When I was a boy growing up in southern Ontario, I experienced a traumatic event that I had buried for many years after. It was the only thing in my life you could call even the slightest bit paranormal. Some people on this site claim they've been having paranormal incidents their entire life, but my life has been a little different. I have no explanation for this story and can't truly answer the question of, do you believe in the paranormal? In a genuine way, because even I don't know that about myself. My grandparents owned a large house in a heavily rural area just outside of Ormsby, Ontario. This was a long time ago, so I don't mind giving out information. I hear the place is practically a ghost town nowadays. Be young me, visiting grandparents during summer, getting dropped off with my two brothers and sister. Parents are leaving for a while and want us to spend quality time with grandparents while they're still here. Typical fighting and bickering in a car ride. Two older brothers can never keep their hands to themselves. Younger sister minding her business like me. Father tells us to mind our manners and do as our grandparents tell us since he doesn't trust the place they're living at. Be stupid kid and not understand what he means, but yeah, sure, I'll behave. Drive through the little town of Ormsby, if you can even call it that, before grandparents, a very quaint place, can still remember the layout of the area. Eventually they make it to grandparents' place. They're excited to see us obviously and happy to have us over for a while. First thing my family notices is all of the trees and brush that were cut down around the property. Grandpa was busy with the chainsaw over the past couple years. I'm talking like a couple 100 meters, or maybe I'm just misremembering the size since I was such a small kid at the time. Short and scrawny for my age. Cutting all those trees down was impressive for a man of his age anyway. Greet grandparents and go inside for tea and to settle in as my parents visit for a while. They talk about how my grandparents are doing in retirement and how my parents are handling jobs, etc. Conversation switches to all of the cut down trees on the property, opening the whole place up. My dad actually likes how it looks with a very large backyard and wide spanning lawn. My mom, on the other hand, has always been a nut for trees, so is disappointed that all their beautiful deciduous trees are gone. Grandmother and grandfather go quiet and try to change the conversation as my mom badgers them for cutting down so many beautiful trees. They talk about other shit for a while. Still remember how idiot brothers almost broke a glass cabinet with their squabbling while they were talking. Dumbasses.jpg. Parents leave and kiss us goodbye and tell us they'll be back in about a week. Let the fun times begin. On the first night, grandparents light a fire in the backyard on a fire pit for us to roast marshmallows. Shit was cash. Sun is still setting and it is just before nightfall, and I look off into the distance of the clearing. See a large dark square object just in the corner surrounded by a really thick bush. Point it out to my grandmother, she doesn't say anything about it. Ask my grandfather instead and he says it's just an old cabin they uncovered from the brush when they were cutting all the trees down. He says not to think too much of it. Older brothers overhear us and say they want to check it out. Grandfather shouts a little bit but quickly catches himself, saying it's getting too dark to go exploring and they should just stay by the fire. Older brothers reluctantly say yes. Later on at night, getting tucked into bed by grandfather and ask him what's in the old cabin in the corner of the clearing. Grandfather says he's never been in it. Tells me he and grandmother didn't even know about it before they cleared all the brush and trees around it. I find that hard to believe, but my grandparents aren't the exploring type and they don't like going on walks, so it stands to reason that they haven't explored all of their property. They've only had the place for a few years anyway, and the first time I was there was the first year they moved in. Fall asleep. The next day, hanging out with my grandmother outside. Older brothers are hitting rocks with sticks or some shit because that's all we had to do back then. They talk about the cabin in the corner of the clearing and ask my grandmother if they can go near it. Grandmother tells them not to. Stupid older brothers say it's fine now because it's daylight and not dangerous. She still tells them it's still unsafe because of how old and rotted the cabin is. It might have rusty nails or broken planks in it that could hurt them. Oldest brother argues with her more. She stands up and scolds him for disobeying her and arguing with her. We're all a little bit taken aback by this because she's not usually like this. She walks inside and we decide we won't ask to go inside the cabin. Later that night, in bed reading a book and talking with my sister, hear what sounds like a fox scream outside. We think it's cool and listen for a bit. Sounds kind of low pitch for a fox, but we think nothing of it. Kind of like this but more low pitch. Make up spooky story of a giant killer fox to scare my sister to sleep. Eventually I end up falling asleep. Wake up in the middle of the night to the fox noise again, sounds much farther away this time. My sister is still asleep. Go back to sleep but it takes a while, I have trouble dozing off. Next morning, siblings and I played frisbee outside. The game quickly devolves into cheating and dick moves. Oldest brother throws a frisbee close to the cabin. Without thinking, run and grab it to throw it back. We kept playing outside for hours. Later in the day at dinner, grandfather tells us he saw us get close to the cabin. We defend ourselves saying we didn't go inside it. He tells us not to even go near it now, new rules. Older brothers were a little pissed but we were told to do as our grandparents say. A couple days go by. Late one night, having trouble sleeping again. Not normal for me at all, only started happening at my grandparents' house. Hear raised voices from downstairs. Siblings asleep. Walk to the stairs and hear my grandparents talking about something. I ain't been dropping no eaves sir honest.png. Grandfather says something about it getting closer, and grandmother says, it shouldn't be with the tree line so far out now. No idea what they are talking about. Grandfather says something like, see it by the cabin. Decide whatever they're talking about is too spooky for me. I will try my best to go back to bed. The next day the brothers decide they want to go into the cabin. My little sister tells them it's a bad idea and they shouldn't disobey our grandparents. I'm still spooked about the conversation last night but I just end up being a huge pussy and don't say anything. Older brothers decide they're going and that's that. Little sister says she will go too to stop them from doing anything stupid. I end up getting dragged into it as well. Wait for grandparents to leave for groceries. They tell my older brothers to watch us younger kids and make sure we don't get into any trouble. They leave for a bit and we decide now is the time to go into the cabin. We're walking up and cracking jokes about the cabin and how spooky it is. It's just around dusk but we stupid kids don't think about how fast the sun goes down. Once we're at the cabin we make a game of who's going to touch it first. The second oldest brother decides he has the balls. Walks up to the cabin slowly and knocks on it once then jumps away really quickly. Nothing happens. Come to the logical conclusion that our grandparents were bullshitting us. Walk up to the cabin door and slowly open it. Dark inside but we march in anyway. There was some broken wooden furniture and tools scattered around the walls. A single rotting shelf stood against the wall we were facing. Turned around the hall and saw a big window almost completely obscured by brush and leaves. Walk up the rickety stairs to the second floor of the cabin to check it out. Thin hallway with a few doors. Some were so rotted you could see the holes through it. There was a hole in the floor that you could see the first floor through. Look into all the shitty rooms in awe and joke about how bad it smells. Make it to the end of the hall and find a steep as fuck staircase. I have to help my little sister up since it was so hard to walk up. In the attic of the cabin. The place is like a maze. Random walls up and about with junk and old boards lying everywhere. Make our way to the end of the attic where it's a little more open. We're all standing around and playing with the junk. We're all stumbling and laughing about it since it's starting to get a little darker now, sun's going down. Can still see everything clearly. Notice my sister standing still with a glassy-eyed expression on her face. She's looking off to the side of the attic with no movement. Older brothers notice too and they ask why she's being so weird. Look to where she's looking. At what appears to be a closet in the attic. Just a frame with no door, can barely see what's inside. Then we all focus and see it. A young woman in a pale blue dress torn at the knees. Except there was something seriously wrong with her. After a few moments of silence, the thing in the closet took a few silent steps toward us out of the closet. The footsteps made no noise at all. We could now see the thing clearly. It was in the shape of a young woman, but it was a rotting, disease-ridden, moldy body. It had long, greasy brown hair covering part of its face. The dress was torn and faded with dirt smears all over it. Its legs looked like it had all the flesh chewed off of its calves. They were unbelievably skinny. The arms had more meat on them, but they looked even more rotted. Shriveled like a pink grape with holes and mold spots all over them. There was something wrong with the chest and torso as well. Looked almost concave, like it had caved in on itself. Its face had no eyeballs, or pure black eyes that looked like empty eye sockets. A really long pointed nose for some reason. Could have been the skin shriveling up and falling off downwards. A slack jaw that hung low. It looked like it had something in its mouth. After focusing my eyes, I could see there were rows and rows of human teeth. We watched this thing look at us for a few minutes, could have been a few seconds even, but they felt like hours. It moved so slowly and silently, taking a long time to turn its head to look at each of us individually. At this point I literally pissed myself. I think my sister had done the same. The thing started to make a sound like it was breathing in, but the noise was restrained and raspy, very low. Then it let out a screech that burst our eardrums. It was the same scream I mistook for a low-pitched fox call. Our older brothers grabbed us and shoved us to the stairs. We ran through all the stuff on the ground and practically jumped down over all of the thin, steep stairs. Our older brothers were much bigger than us and they almost carried us through the hallway. My oldest brother fell with his foot through the hole in the floorboards. The thing in the closet was starting to come down the stairs, still screaming. My brother lifted himself up out of the hole as fast as he could and kept pushing us down the hallway. We make it out of the cabin and we see our grandfather rushing toward the cabin with a shotgun. Our grandparents had returned from shopping while we were inside the cabin. They were looking for us but didn't think we'd actually go in the cabin. We run to our grandmother just behind him as our grandfather shouts at the thing that was chasing us. He fires several shots but it doesn't do anything. Our grandfather orders us into the house as he is running behind. We pile into the house and our grandfather locks the door behind us. The fox-like screaming is sounding outside with bangs and scrapes on the walls. Our grandfather piles things in front of the doors and windows to stop it from getting in. All the while our grandmother is holding onto us and shaking. My sister is still frozen in terror and I am crying like a baby. My grandfather calls the police and stays at the door, gun ready. Suddenly the fox-like screaming stops. All is silent for a while aside from us children crying. After a few minutes, glass shattering can be heard from the other side of the house. My grandfather rushes to the other side of the house but no gunshots can be heard. After a while, the police arrive and my grandfather takes everything out of the way of the door. They file a report of an intruder on their property chasing their children and trying to break into the house. The police actually take it seriously when they see my siblings' faces. The cops ask if our grandparents are our guardians and they say no. Cops tell grandfather to call our parents to pick us up and take us somewhere safe. Vacation with grandparents is cut a little short as our parents pick us up and take us home. Grandparents apologize profusely. Never go to my grandparents' house again after that. They always came to our house during family gatherings. Parents tried to get my sister and I into therapy. Our older brothers try to forget about the whole thing and they pretend they aren't affected by it like manly men. Sister and I talked to doctors and people who help children with problems for a few years, but we stop after a while. I end up repressing the memory and don't have it resurface until many years later. Grandparents end up moving into retirement homes even though they don't really need to, but mentally they probably wanted to be around people more. Like I said before, Ormsby is basically a ghost town, if you can even call it a town anymore. This all happened a very long time ago. Barely know a single thing about the place anymore and I want to keep it that way.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.